Hello, I'm Pedro Mora with Pacific Media, and now polling.ca. The tendency to sell public assets and public lands and to contract out public services is not unique or exclusive to the City Council of Victoria. It is our current system of representative democracy, which legally empowers a few political representatives to make all the decisions for all of us, whether we like it or not. This program will show you an example of this political flaw and also the possible political solution predicated as Perpetual Direct Democracy. Here is Mayor Dean Fortin.
The City of Victoria back in the early 90s received a big chunk of land from the provincial government for $1. That land turned out to be heavily contaminated. There was a big section of it that was sold off at that time and is now what's known as the dockside redevelopment that's there across the road. The other section is what's currently known as the Point Hope lands. They're zoned industrial lands, they're shipbuilding lands. And so the city has ownership on that. There are lease agreements and arrangements on that land that run to at least 2045. So they're locked up as marine and shipbuilding use for a long time. Beyond our times. And over the last 5 years or so, Relmax, who is the owner of Point Hope Shipyard, has invested over $17 or $18 million on turntables and infrastructure for shipbuilding. As part of the process of lease renewals, the idea has come up is it a better deal for the city, for Relmax, for them to have ownership of it? Provides more certainty for them as they start to continually invest in it. And one of the issues that they've talked about is a $60 million graving dock investment, as well as some other site improvements. For the city, it's a case of, we have these lands, they're going to be used in industrial. Is there a greater value for us to keep them as an ongoing lease arrangement, or is there a better value for us to sell them? And so we're required to get fair market value if whatever that is, and that's something that would have to be determined through a process of assessment. And so where we are is just right at the beginning. Relmax has said, would you be interested in selling these? And we said, we'd be at least be interested in entertaining an offer to see what is out there. And so we'll do that. We'll run all the numbers. We'll see what's best in the interest of protecting the citizens of Victoria, making sure that we're not interfering or hindering the shipbuilding industry. How can we help facilitate that? And we'll see what provides the best goals for the city. If the land is sold, any money that would come from it goes into what's known as our land reserve funds. A minimum of 10% must go into parks and greenways. All other must go into the purchase of other lands. So this is part of the larger question. Does the city have an interest, and should they be really be a landlord for a shipbuilding company, or is there a way to use those funds perhaps to create other parks, things that are more directly related to the public use, such as parks and greenways?
Right now we lease it to Relmax.
Yes.
And how much do we get a year per lease?
Well, the current leases, we inherited those as well. They were originally signed by the province. So I don't have the figure top off my head, but not a lot.
I heard 250,000.
That might be it. Yeah, that's probably the ballpark number. Eventually, those leases will get to market value as their terms go on. So what they do is they have the lease and they have the option, and it's renewed every 5 or 10 years, and that's where it goes.
Would it be a little more to a disadvantage of the city if they own the land than if they're just leasing?
I'm only being careful because we're just entering into negotiations. You
mentioned negotiations, that is under negotiations. What do you mean by negotiating? What's that you're negotiating?
Well, what has happened is basically Point Hope has said, would you be interested in selling? We said, we'd be interested at least to consider an offer. So now...
But that's not negotiations. That's just a question.
So now they'll go out and they'll do their research to see what would be fair market value for the land. the city will go out and do our research to see what would be fair market value for the land. And then we'll, engage, some money people to see which is working out for the best for us, regarding land term, how much we could probably get from a lease versus how much the lands could sell for. And then once that is all wrapped up, then that will come to City Council. Now, it should be known that all of the terms of that negotiation, when it comes forward, will be made public. So all of the terms will be public. It'll be published, and then there will be an opportunity for the public to come forward and say what they think about it. Is it a good deal? Is it a bad deal? Should they go for it? They can speak to City Council on that. Then Council will make a decision on whether it wants to proceed with the sale or not.
I think it's just the definition of negotiation that some people take it as you have already decided, apparently 7-2, to proceed with negotiations. That means how much are you paying and whether we accept your offer or not. Is there an offer been put yet?
No, there's been no offer put. Nobody wanted to go do any of the work unless Council was at least interested in seeing whether there'd be offer. So nothing has been, we have no number in front of us. We have no idea what they want to propose. Now they have to go out and do the work. So all Council really said was, we'd be interested to see what an offer would look like.
Okay, so opening the door for an offer from Realmax.
Yes.
Okay.
Since I've been elected, we have had a few occasions where we are in camera discussing the sale of land. Ben and I have on record for voting, we agreed to rise and report, but Ben and I were on record as voting against selling any public land because I personally do not feel the public have been engaged to this point to make those decisions. It's a tremendous responsibility for me to say okay without consulting with you. So I'm here tonight to listen to what your thoughts are on the sale of public land.
As Shelley mentioned, we've had a few issues that have come to the council table since we were both elected in November that have sort of caused concern in terms of decisions being made by council in the absence of public consultation, and the only role for the public to have a say on whether or not the disposal of lands is appropriate occurring at the very end. Or in the case of the Northern Junk property, it looks like that may already be a foregone issue without the public ever having a say over those lands on the downtown side of the Johnson Street Bridge. This issue came up for the city's been a fairly active regulator of the Point Hope parcels, the lands located here. A lease agreement was recently renewed until 2045 that would eventually go to market-based rent. And a point that comes to me is that for the last 23 years the city has owned this land. Under those conditions of a long-term lease, the operator has thrived. It's chosen to invest $17 million on the site, has a very active, successful shipbuilding operation. That occurred under conditions of city ownership and with the stability and security provided by a long-term lease. For me to agree to sell the lands, I need a much stronger case. We didn't receive any kind of written report on the matter. It was decided late one night, and in the absence of, I think, proper consideration by council and by the public. So that's just one example. To the credit of our fellow councillors, they chose to rise and report, which allowed us to begin this public dialogue. They were all invited to be here tonight. It's my understanding that Lisa Helps will be joining us when a previous meeting ends. The others respectfully declined. So Shelley and I are going to be proposing that the city adopt a land sale policy. We currently have a fairly flimsy document, which Erwin is going to share with you, relating to the disposal of highway lands or surplus lands, which is if a road was closed, that potentially a slice of it could be sold to the adjoining property owner. But there's no robust city policy that would allow us to go step by step to determine if a parcel of land is surplus to current or future needs, and also then to see if it is surplus, what kind of process needs to unfold in terms of consulting the public, but also receiving the best price, the best return for the city. In past decades, the city disposed of a considerable volume of land. In the 1990s, there was a study where a private consultant looked at 80 parcels to assess if some of them were surplus. At that time, a number of residential lots were sold off, but that consultant advised the city that it should hold on to its industrial and commercial parcels, and that it was more prudent to manage those through long-term leases rather than through outright sale, because it would allow the city to retain some control over the parcels while still providing stability through long-term leases. A real benefit, according to the consultant, was that any lift in land values in terms of the appreciation of the land, that benefit would accrue to the city rather than to private entities that may purchase those lands. So I haven't yet seen a compelling case why that recommendation, why those rationale have changed. So in my view, I think we should really consider that principle, that holding land has real value to the city, both in terms of the return year over year, but also in terms of the long-term control over the lands, whether for industrial or commercial use, or for parks or greenways, or other purposes that we can't even conceive of at this time. So we're going to turn it to you. We have an open mic, and after some discussion, we'll turn it to Erwin, who's going to share some best practices from other cities. The goal of today's meeting is a concrete policy that Shelley and I will be presenting to our council colleagues, both to inform the current issue over Harbour Road, but also how to move forward into the future.
My name is Caspar Davis, and I live just off 40 on the edge of Rockland. I really wanted to take the opportunity to express my feelings. I feel very strongly that the city should not sell any land unless there's a really compelling reason.
It's Ray Zimmerman. And the use of the word surplus is what is really most telling. And it implies that we don't need it, right? And it's exactly the opposite with public land, I think. There's nothing surplus about it. And to give you an example of how the word surplus initiated a campaign, in the early 90s, the Greater Victoria Water District called their off-catchment lands surplus lands. And that word surplus at that time is what brought many organizations and individuals together to protect the C2C and Sioux Hills area. So surplus is the telling part. So it's wonderful that you brought this up.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is George Casteras. I live on Tillicum Road. I live with these city-owned properties, as opposed to giving a short-term 5-year loan or selling them off the bat. I think it'd be more prudent for the city to just keep a number of properties and have itself a steady, stable source of income. So what I'm saying is that I'm all for the city owning a number of properties.
Good evening. My name is Ken Johnson. I'm the president of the Hallmark Society. My main concerns are, of course, the industrial lands along the Upper Harbor, and they're also the concerns at the Northern Dump Buildings. Many of you may not be aware, but in January of 2010, the city issued a letter to the developer of the property that if he met certain minimal conditions, they would consider rezoning and selling him the property. Ben says it seems like it's a done deal. Gee, I thought these things had to go to the citizens. I thought we approved rezoning in a citizens forum, not in the back rooms and closed camera sessions. And I hope that the citizens have turned out enough to step back and take a look at the sale of those lands at the end of the Johnson Street Bridge.
Alice Albert, Fairfield resident of 32 years. Ditto to all the previous remarks, and I'm opposed to any further sale of public lands for any reason in Victoria, and I believe in due process, and thank you.
My name is Colleen, and I have a restaurant in the Selkirk waterfront. And in regards to the homeless shelter, there was something that was done 5 years ago in a back room. Rock Bay Landing was decided upon. A park was removed from our inventory in the Rock Bay area and has not been replaced. So maybe that should be addressed before we start talking about selling land. I mean, let's replace the one we promised to 5 years ago.
Mike DeWolf, I live in the Quadra Hillside area. I'm not confident that the City of Victoria can adequately manage the properties. In the past, when developers have actually had conditions set upon them for developments, the city hasn't held them to account for those developments or for those conditions, and it just gives them a pass. So any of the properties that ended up for sale, any conditions attached to them to make sure that they have a future use that's in public interest are probably not going to be upheld.
Hi, my name is Russ Fanucchi. I own a piece of land on the industrial on the other side. I'm not sure what the game plan is, but 17 million to me sounds like, again, how did they come up with that number? Who came up with that number? Did it go out to public tender?
No.
Transport Canada on that side of the Rock Bay, they also are selling all their lands. Has anybody heard of them up for public tender? They haven't put them up for public tender either. So I'm not sure what's going on or how that's all working, but I cannot see that land staying residential or commercial for much longer.
Hi, Holly Patterson, Madam Big West. I just want to say that this parcel of land is prime for future amenities for public, and it should be thought of very carefully before you sell it or consider selling it. And because we'd never be able to buy it back, it would just be way out of our league to buy it back. Who knows, in the future we might want to use it for a public walkway or something. It's industrial now, but it might not always stay that way.
My name's Paul. I'm a Fairfield resident. You know, as I say, in some cases maybe they can be sold, but it shouldn't be done behind closed doors. And I applaud you for what you're doing. Okay, thank you.
This actually isn't being negotiated behind closed doors because we are all here tonight talking about it. So the council voted unanimously to rise and report on the potential sale of Harbour Roads to the Harbour Road lands to Ralmax so that we could have a discussion.
These negotiations that you called, which are not really negotiations, they're more like an inquiry, are they on behind closed doors? Are they in camera?
The negotiations will be done between our staff and Ralmax. Once they've reached a certain threshold, then our staff have to report back to council, and those negotiations are public. So you don't negotiate in public, but the offer is public.
But I understand this is not a negotiation, it's just an inquiry about a future negotiation. Or is it actually a negotiation where they are saying, we'll give you so many millions, and you're saying, no, that's too low, you have to come up higher?
Right. So the process is, they said, it's an inquiry about whether you're interested in selling. Mm-hmm. Council has made a decision that said, we might be interested, tell us what your offer is. Mm-hmm. So now the process is they will go into negotiations between Ralmax and staff. Once if there's something that staff feels there's value to bring forward to council, then it'll come forward to council. If they can't agree, it may never happen, right?
So the decision will be based on how much is the offer?
The decision will be based on many factors. How much is offered, over what term, a lot of other agreements, side agreements might be in there. You know, the cost of remediation and cleanup, all those sort of issues are going to form part of what the offer is in the long term.
Why do you need a policy? Why is it a good thing? What are common features that different processes have? There's a sale versus lease. I looked at 3 different organizations. One is Dorian, Ontario, and it is a peculiar municipality. It has a population of less than 400 and over 200 square miles of area. And it has a unique policy. The Whitehorse has a policy, and it came about because the real estate interests in Whitehorse wanted clear and concise and consistent decision-making, and the real estate developers there put together a policy that the community bought into. And Newark, New Jersey, they have a different motivation. They use it as a catalyst for revitalizing neighborhoods and creating jobs. So they're a proactive one. So I thought this is the spectrum. I also looked at San Luis Obispo, which I look at often because they have the most interesting and well-designed public policy website. You can watch their policy from tree planting to naming of public buildings, and they're all consistently expressed. They're all publicly available. So that is the sort of 4th one that I looked at. 3 common features of all of them. They require independent and expert appraisals. They all have more than one method. It isn't one size fits all. If you're trying to get the best value for the community, it may be a bidding process, or it may be you offer it to contiguous landholders, or whatever. But I think that a policy has got to have more than one avenue for sale, and all of them have public access to the process. The start of the process in all of these is a public register or inventory of public lands. is to have some way of letting the public know that land is up for offer, whether it's declared to be surplus or it's available for sale. Most of them have a notice to other public bodies, so that the city, before selling it to the public, would offer it to the school board, to the transit authority, to other public bodies that may need the land for some purpose. And that's pretty consistent through the different processes. Most of them have a way of describing why the land is up for sale, whether it is deemed to be surplus. Before a piece of property goes up for sale, there's a need to go through what are the plans, zoning, public issues associated with those lands. There needs to be an appraisal or an economic evaluation. The council needs to determine the method of sale, and San Luis Obispo is the only one that has, for every public property, a sale or lease option built into the process. And they consider the, technically, the stream of future income, likely future, what will be the public interest in 40 years for this piece of property. Finally, some places have a policy about where the money goes. And some, Newark, 20% goes to an affordable housing fund from every sale. Another one has that if you sell parkland, the money goes into the parks fund. Finally, I think that the future may lie in policies for co-development, and I didn't see a lot of this in any of the ones that I looked at. And I also learned at the same time that the original value of the land that the city owns is now $132 million. The present value we have no idea of, but that's quite a bit of money.
Who in the end should be involved in the final decision? Just 9 people in the city council, the 8 councillors and you, or should the public at large be involved in making that decision?
Well, I think the public is always welcome to give their information, their opinion. And we want to have that because that's part of the reflection of the community values, and it's something that we're always interested.
Are you going to?
In the end, council makes the decision. That's part of what's known as representative democracy. I'm not 9 people. I was elected by 10,500 people. Every council was elected to do that voice. Do you go to referendum on it? Is every decision made by the City of Victoria go to referendum? Yeah. In which case, we don't run the city, ipso reid does. And who defines the question? Someone has to define the question. So ultimately, council is entrusted with that decision. Council is always seeks information from the public. I will be out at community meetings saying to people, this is part of the information that we have, feeding that information back into our council so that they know what's happening. But ultimately, it's one of those things that council often balances. Is 5 people the majority of the citizens of Victoria? How many people do you need to hear from? And so that's the question, right?
Yeah. I guess the question is a political one that says the representative politicians have the right to make decisions, even if people didn't know that they were going to make those decisions. But legally, you have the right to make those decisions. So it's not your fault that you're making a decision, even if the majority of people would oppose it.
Well, fundamentally, every time you get into an election process, it's one of the things I always say is, people vote for the person. You say you recognize that there are thousands of decisions that council will make over a 3-year term, and on it, someone say, well, you didn't mention that on the campaign trail. Well, to a certain extent, no one knew it existed. So when you do vote, you want to vote for someone who reflects your values, who you talk to, and through that process you do that. But certainly it's part of what we need to do in a complex society is recognize that representative democracy is the way that is most effective to have the citizens in control of the decisions and still have decisions being made.
Yeah. There are a lot of decisions that politicians make, and in some cases that's not the decision of the majority of the people. Of course, we don't know in this particular case. But if we go in the past and some other deals, there has been times where most people oppose. Say, for instance, our intervention in Afghanistan. Poll after poll showed that most people didn't want it, yet the government had the legal right to proceed with whatever their decision was. Free trade agreement, apparently most people did not accept that. But the Mulroney government at that time said, well, that is what's going to go. And they have the legal right to do that. So are we here more or less in the same situation that the majority of people's decision doesn't really matter because you have the power to make that decision?
I think that council does a remarkable good job of reflecting what the majority's opinion is. A good example is a lot of people would say, well, there was no support for building a new bridge. When we actually went out to referendum, it was 62% of the people approved of it and 38% didn't. So, all I'm saying is, don't confuse the loud voices with as the majority of the voices.
In all fairness, we'll have to recognize that the question wasn't whether people approve the bridge. The question was which way people want to pay for it. So the question never came of whether the bridge should be built or not. The 60% of people that voted for the way how it should be paid, because the question was, you want to pay it with MasterCard or Visa, through taxes or through something else. And,
I think it was pretty clear that it was a referendum on which way people wanted to go with the bridge.
Probably.
Yeah.
Okay, probably. Now, how can people get involved in conflicting issues like this? How can people participate? Are you going to have perhaps not a referendum, because the last time you told me it's too expensive, $200,000. But can you have some open meetings to the public where people can go, or hearings where people can go and express their views?
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, don't ever underestimate sending an email, sending a letter. That comes to mayor, that comes to council, is distributed to all of us, so we all know, and it actually forms part of the public record. It will be included, so everyone has that. That's a great place to do it. There's many, how would I put it, formal ways, informal ways for people to engage. There's the mayor's open door, which we have every 2 weeks. People come in and talk. Each councillor liaison is responsible to each of their communities and neighborhoods. They will be there, and people can feed into that sort of system as well. Because it is on the Vic West, in the Vic West community, I'll be hosting a meeting, or actually attending a Vic West community meeting to see if there's any questions that people might have on that sort of stuff.
When is that going to be?
We're just checking to find out now when the next Vic West community meeting is going to be there.
So you will inform people when this meeting is going to be in Vic West?
Oh, absolutely.
And you're also opening the door for people that have concerns about this issue to bring it to the agenda and present it in council.
Yeah.
Gradually, our political system seems to be turning around from the hierarchical representative democracy and to perpetual direct democracy. You can explore Perpetual Direct Democracy on this booklet published by Amazon.com. Or you can read it online on pacific.ca.